Yes, Kaveh, well, I've been speaking with the diplomatic sources here. We know already that Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was headed to Geneva. Of course, we heard officials and diplomatic sources say he's here regarding talks on Syria, because we know that Mr. Zarif also met with Lakhdar Brahimi, the special UN envoy and Arab League envoy on Syria, and Mr. Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, will also be here. So it looks like there are two agendas involved, both the Syria issue separately and the Iranian nuclear talks taking place on a separate level. However, Iranian diplomatic sources were telling me that Mr. Sergei Lavrov will be involved in the nuclear talks on Iran, as well as the talks that he's holding separately on the Syria issue. So it looks like things have become more serious. But another thing to mention here was today, this morning, almost 9 a.m. local time, we saw the third day of talks start between Catherine Ashton and Mr. Zarif. The session was not very long, and as soon as that session ended, we had very long hours, we could say, talks among the E3+3, and also talks and negotiations among the Iranian team themselves. So it looks like after hours of intensive negotiations and probably consultations, as you say, with their capitals, we may be seeing an agreement coming up. Of course, I don't have any confirmation whether we're going to have an agreement, but when I was speaking with Mr. Zarif, he was saying that I am positive about this, I'm not pessimistic, and I think that the sticking points, though they do remain, he said they are not too, I wouldn't say they're not too big, but they're not too much. He said that the sticking points are limited, so maybe some kind of a trust can be built. We'll have to, of course, wait and see whether the foreign minister is going to get involved. But since Sergei Lavrov is expected to take part in these talks, then we might see others arriving as well.
You know, Homa, of course, we're going on lots of speculation when it comes to these talks, and I have to ask you this, even though it may be speculation, but the one thing during that interview that Zarif talked about as being one of the sticking points is Iran's red line, which is its right to enrich. But there's lots of confusion about this right to enrichment. If you can clarify that for us, because it's one thing for Iran to have its right to enrich, but then we're hearing, of course, that the P5+1 has agreed, and Iran has also said that they would limit their nuclear enrichment to the 5% level. So you would think that by default then that gives Iran its right to enrich. Viewers might view that as being very confusing. If you can explain that a little bit further for us.
Well, Iran has been saying, throughout the talks all along that the level of enrichment is up for negotiation, that it's prepared to negotiate changing the level of its enrichment. And we even had the head of the Iranian Atomic Energy Organization, Ms. Ali Akbar Salehi, saying earlier on that it's not even economical for Iran to enrich uranium to the 20% level unless it has to. So Iran is saying if it gets the guarantees that it needs, it can negotiate the level of enrichment or even accept stopping enrichment to the 20% level, but only if we're talking about a balanced and reciprocal agreement. What the enrichment issue is all about, Kaveh, is how that enrichment right is mentioned inside of a draft text, because Iran says if we don't have that right to enrichment mentioned on paper, this is not going to give us guarantee, because we think even if we stop the 20%, we may get more demands and excessive demands. We only want a balanced approach. We are ready to negotiate on the level of enrichment, but we have to know that the E3+D has accepted on paper that we have the right to enrich uranium. The Iranian foreign minister making it quite clear that this is not anything that could even be debated, because it's clear, according to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that Iran does have that right. That right inherently is Iran's, he says, because it's a signatory to the NPT. Article 4 of the NPT says that those countries which are signatories to this treaty have a right to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes. Apparently, the other side is interpreting it in a different way, saying this doesn't necessarily mean that any country has a right to enrichment, something that Iran disagrees with. Again, Mr. Zarif saying these are not, however, issues that cannot be overcome. He's hopeful that the two sides can reach some kind of an understanding on this.
And finally, before I let you go, I know we're going to be speaking again, but do you get the feeling that it's all or nothing, today being the last day, or is there any chance or possibility of this being extended for a fourth day?
Well, you see, we were speaking just after the morning session with Mr. Araghchi, one of the chief negotiators, and he was telling us these talks may even continue until tomorrow. So certainly we cannot say that the talks are going to end today. It looks like this time round the talks are very serious. I mean, I was speaking with the spokesperson of Ms. Ashton as well, and he was saying that this time it's a bit different. We are actually talking about very serious, detailed issues here, and this is a good sign. It means that if the political will exists, then these talks might actually bear fruit. And Mr. Zarif was telling me that political will exists. He said that on the part of Iran, he can confirm that it exists. And he said we can also say that we believe, as the Iranian side of the talks, that the E3+3 has come forward with that will, and we think that we need further negotiations to make further progress. I mean, he was saying that it's, you know, negotiations are negotiations. We have ups and downs. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be a result or that there's not going to be a deal. So they are optimistic and the whole atmosphere is optimistic. However, you know, just last night Mr. Mann was telling me we're not speaking about a deal yet. I asked Mr. Zarif if you've entered any talks yet on a deal, and he said the wording, the conceptual differences are part of a text of a deal, so we have to speak about those concepts, speak about the wording, and hopefully once that is done, then, you know, getting into a deal is not going to be that hard.